I want
Yeah.
to thank everybody. I think we know our guests, Michelle Lopez and Karyn Olivier. I'm James Britt, Director of Public Engagement. So I want to welcome everybody to this conversation. It's a fairly casual format, as you can probably figure out by now. Send us questions if you have those. We will respond to them. If not throughout the dialogue, definitely we'll save about 30 minutes near the end to answer some questions. And this discussion is in context of Michelle and Karyn's exhibitions, but we also were thinking about this particular moment, and there's a lot of just resonance that exists in their work and their practices, and just wanted to expand upon that. I know a place, I'm going to be sort of like a very silent moderator in this program. So the two participants are going to be the two primary people in dialogue, but I do want to kick it off with just how you enter into this space, because both of you with your work and with your exhibitions, there's very profound ways that the visitor engages with the work, and you're already setting a particular tone about what's going to happen coming forward. So I think in particular with Halyard, for you, Michelle, and with you, Karyn, the Carnation piece, those are very poignant objects and experiences for visitors to engage with immediately. So maybe if we can start there, sort of like an introduction to this conversation, and kind of see where things go from there.
Well, yeah, I mean, I initially the conversation was going to be about, because Karyn and I both run sculpture programs, that it was going to be just a conversation about sculpture initially, and then when the uprising happened, it became a more profound conversation about how our work is in relationship to how, I mean, for me at least, in terms of how I'm racialized and perceived, and how that's kind of translated through how I think about the work sculpturally and through my body. And so, yeah, so much all of this work is so much, for me, just about the current climate. And so I thought it would just be a good conversation to have with Karyn about, because what ended up happening is, as we've been talking, there have just been a lot of commonalities in terms of thinking about themes in relationship to absence and invisibility and displacement and movement. And and power, and trying to expose that power and dismantle it at the same time, and particularly in relationship to monuments. I mean, I'm all conflating it now, but it's they're all issues that I think are things that, when we were talking, we realized that we both were just approaching work in similar ways in relationship to the ephemeral. And just, for me, it's like, we were also talking about the fact that we had both covered cars. So, and what is the impulse behind that? And for me, so much of it has to do with this, the piece where I covered in leather, this Karyn leather. It was about this feminist translation of an objectified body, but removing the body in a way. And sorry, I'm jumping all over the place now, but and then thinking of things in terms of like in relationship just to that removal of the body, and yet having that presence be there in a way. Yeah, sorry, Karyn, you should talk a little bit.
No, I was thinking that both of our practices kind of engage the human condition, and this moment for the human beings right now is so extraordinary, overwhelming. There's a resignation, but there's also beauty, there's frustration. I think when I think about the carnation piece, I knew I wanted to do something that could speak about scale shouldn't matter. The heaviness of material shouldn't matter. There's many ways to create monuments. There are many ways to create memorials. So what would it mean to have a flower that we know has many references, but a flower that we know will eventually wilt? It will eventually lose the life that it has and dry out, but it could still have this density of meaning. What would it mean for people to come in and unknowingly they're wearing, you put on this red carnation, hopefully you'll put it on or carry it like a talisman. But in that act, unknowingly, we've made a community. 10 people in the gallery. Well, nowadays, no one in the gallery, but the idea that we, for a period of time, can matter to each other, even if we're not super conscious of it. But my thought was like, if we are all holding this, we're holding this with a certain sort of symbolism and meaning that we collectively share. And then what does it mean when we kind of leave and something of that could be retained because we had that moment together? And of course, that piece had references specifically to the history of the founding of Mother's Day and the relationship to the carnation and Jarvis, who founded Mother's Day. But then of course, the more deliberate reference was to May 12th, the day that the MOVE members were given the eviction notices. And of course, the next day was the bombing. So I was hoping that this little kind of nothingness, in a way, almost the most cheesy flower, could kind of hold these disparate histories, the beauty of Mother's Day, but also the sadness of Mother's Day if you've lost your mother, but also the ambivalence of that day of knowing that we know now the next day was one of the worst moments in the history of Philadelphia. So, yeah.
Well, it's interesting because it's a gesture of reparation in a way that provides this moment of hope of that, yeah, by pinning the carnation on a person and then this dispersion of these carnations going out there, that it repairs it in a way. And I like thinking about those notions of how an idea can get out there into space. And it's through, we were talking about the removal of the body and like in the work, but the ways that it can be transmitted through the movement of other bodies.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that. Like, what is it for you? What does it mean to not include the figure? Like, what does it mean for that not to be seen? Like, I'm sure there's overlaps between what we think about that, but I'm curious how you see the absence of the corporeal.
Yeah, I mean, some of it has to do with not wanting to participate in a kind of figuration in this kind of racial capitalism in a way. It's like, what do you do when you put, like, I'm always curious about this kind of commodified Black or brown body that kind of gets put into the system in a sense. And I think it's a way for me to subversively have this kind of a diffuse form of figuration in a way, or an alternate form to kind of subvert that system in some ways. And also it's like this way of like, how do you remove it from this kind of capitalistic male gaze and then have it become something else? Like in terms of, say, your car, I'm curious to, like, in a way, like all of those collections of, it's like ghost forms because it has the history of the body, but it's a collection of them as, you use the word citizenry. And so it has that history, and yet, like I'm always interested in the ways, because there's also a problem of representation, right? With this idea of figuration that I always find problematic. And so it's, how can I kind of talk about that, that humanity that you were talking about, but in ways that are more about the residue of humanity in a sense.
And I think too with that, like often, you know, the assumption with Black and brown artists is that you're going to represent a physical representation of what Blackness or brownness or identity is. So when you don't, I think it kind of throws people off because that's what they're expecting.
Right.
You know? And I'm like, with the work, it does, I don't need that physical body represented. What does it mean for me? I kept thinking I wanted my documentation, if we had more time, to have the figures be in the space, be Black and brown. I didn't want the models to be
right.
where I want to think about. So I was thinking like, is it a generous act by not having the figure? So what does it mean that I, as a viewer or gallery go, all of a sudden now, maybe it's generous that you don't have to pin it, you don't have to kind of tie down the subjectivity, or is it the onus, putting an onus, like all of a sudden there's a burden to it, all of a sudden now, what does it mean that I am the stand-in for this person? What does it mean that this piece could talk about the refugee crisis, or talk about genocide, talk about loss, talk about devastation, but I am kind of, by it not being visible in a way, it's still seen, it's still spotlit, I still have to deal with it. And does it allow for a heightened empathy is what I hope by not having the figure, and I kind of have to shoulder some of that. Or even if I don't want to shoulder it, I can't deny that the absence of if you see clothing, bodies should be in it. You see shoes, so what does it mean for me to think about a specific identity? Who's that person? Who wore that shoe? That shoe that's completely worn out, or that shoe that looks brand new? Or the idea of the anonymous, like I can't even grasp the enormity of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, or is it, I always wonder if it's participating in a kind of erasure, you know, like Hilton, I don't know if you read that great New Yorker article by Hilton Als recently, Homecoming. It was about his mother. So it was really beautiful. And it was about the protests and how he was contending with that. But he talks about racism in relationship to a kind of erasure, like a kind of, like if you've ever been discriminated, that it's this unmooring diminishment, and that what ends up happening as a result of that is that you don't know who you are, which is really, it's quite profound. And it's this question for me, it's like, as this result of the removal of the body and this kind of invisibility, am I participating in that culture of not asserting a certain kind of space, you know, that's, or is it radical because of its removal, you know?
Because how easily it could be misinterpreted, the move to not have it there.
Right,
you know?
right. What is your...
All of a sudden it's minimalist, it's talked only in terms of minimalism.
Right.
certain art historical, very white male.
Right. Yeah.
Also, what does it mean for me to allow the space, because I trust my people, I trust us to kind of be able to use what's here, you know?
Right. How did you approach it initially in terms of like that, that removal?
I think I trust materials, I trust objects. I think it might even harken back to being from the Caribbean, where you're always thinking about the mutability of objects. You're always thinking, yes, the objects have a history, the objects have a baggage, the objects have certain use, but that use and usefulness could always change, value can change, things could always shift. So in a way, if an object, I have agency in that, and having an object have a meaning. So there's, to me, it's like, how do I trust that power? Like, yes, a brick could build a wall, but a brick could be a weapon if you need it to be, right? So I'm interested in like trusting or seeing, understanding the what if, or how I can expand or kind of keep reinterpreting and reimagining these objects for my own my own power.
Yeah.
I have to start with my own position, but assuming that there will be someone else who could imagine that for themselves as well.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about that mutability?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, I think.
And where that you were talking about the Caribbean.
Yeah, I mean, in Trinidad, literally the empty parking lot at night is where you'll have a fete. And this happens, you know, throughout the Caribbean, throughout the, you know, third world, you know, it's like, okay, but it happens here too, but maybe we don't recognize it, you know. You have a chair that I'm sitting on, but in a pinch, it's a ladder. In a pinch, if I don't have a table, it's where I can put my food. So the idea that nothing is wasted, nothing's squandered, everything. And there's something about, I was thinking about Carnival too, in the beginnings of Carnival, and how was the space of, at least in Trinidad, it started pretty much after emancipation, 1834. But it was this space of subverting, taking the everyday and flipping it. All of a sudden I have a cloth and a wire and I become a bat. Like I don't need much to completely transform who I am at this moment, which won't last because Carnival's only a couple days, but it's allowing me to imagine a different way to live and different possibility. About
I think,
now,
yeah, I think it's, I mean, the Philippines has it. And I always associate it with, for me, like this third world country, we'll just make do with what we have. And it's always inspiring for me to just look at things on the street, because the basketball hoop will be made out of sticks, and it's that kind of an invention. And I think so much of that is in the Ballast and Barricades, like the barricade piece, where it's like, okay, how can a stick and a rope and a rock kind of
we go to that image,
inspire a rebellion. I think it's got the one with the Ballasts and Barricades. It's the one with the continuous line. I think I saw an image of that, James, if you scroll through. Yeah, so it's the, oh, back. It's the one with the barricade, the orange barricade, and yeah, I mean, it's all just suspended on its own. It's if you move it one other way, it will fall. But all of the rope is the rope we made ourselves, so it could actually be structural. So it's holding the thing up, and then the rock is acting as a kind of counterweight. But it's kind of like what you were talking about, this brick as something to be thrown. It was the same thing with the piece of rubble, that it could almost have this kind of quality of being the slingshot.
Can you talk, I'm curious about, like you're definitely tethering, you know, the formidable with the fragile, you know, kind of like a perfect moment with disaster. Then there's also the idea of looking at it from afar, and it's a drawing which has a certain consequence, but then you get close and all of a sudden, like, the stakes are so high. So I'm curious about, like, all those things, the formidable and the fragile, the flatness, because we even said that word earlier, and then you realize, wait a second, and all of a sudden then you realize, oh my God, one slight move, and that, of course, that has so much metaphoric possibilities and meanings, or like real world stuff. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, so much of it is in, I mean, you know, it's been building all along of the work just being in relationship to political events, but that, and also just really thinking of sculpturally how I could somehow translate that moment of this kind of house of cards feeling, that that the things that we're familiar with are collapsing. You know, it's like what Obama said last night in his speech, like, our democracy is at threat. And that's really, in a way, where the work is coming from, of like, wow, what I thought I understood is actually collapsing. And so, I mean, for me, it's like where the delicacy is, it comes in the form of, say, that could be like what you were talking about, like that's where my agency is, and that's where the invention comes in that mutability of making something do something else, is that the rope, instead of it being this limp rope, it becomes the thing that holds it up, that an individual could actually, you know, just kind of overthrow things. And so it's like the one hope for me that like, maybe if we kind of together build this thing, it could prevent things from collapsing in the same way that
Take it with you if you need to and set it up. You know what I mean?
right,
I like that idea too, that I can take this
yeah,
with me.
yeah.
So this made me think of something else with your work. It feels as though if you made the brick wall piece, you would have made your own bricks. I could never like make my own chain link. I could consider making that piece, but it would never occur. Like it wouldn't even be in my. And I'm curious about what that is to the work. Is it the people seeing it and then they notice the hand in it because it's not perfect? Like I'm wondering what the function is of how it functions for you, and at what point do you want that to be revealed, or is it important for it to be revealed?
Yeah, I don't know if it's important. I think it comes back to the formalist that you can't crumple a chain link fence because chain link fences, they're based on, you know, tension. And the minute that you take away the tension, it loses its form. And so I wanted to, you know, like that piece continuous line, which is the thing in the back where basically Karyn knows that I didn't weld it, but I had an assistant figure out how to make a chain link fence. And then he welded every spot in order to give it its form. And then we crushed it. And it was really to just like that thing of, you try in the same way, Karyn, you're like, just like with that mutability, like how can I make this happen in the most economic way? And I can see that in your work, like in terms of conceptually to get it to where it needs to be. And for me, it was just about thinking about this continuous line and having everything be codependent on each other so that it would almost be collapsing. Like when we were talking about monuments, this is like my kind of translation of an Iwo Jima monument, where it was like a limp rope and a twig is supporting these other cultural structures of a flagpole drooping and a chain link fence and a police barricade. But it's like I wanted, you know, it's like I have these thoughts, like I want this chain link fence to be gripping onto life, and the only way I can do that is to make it myself. And so that's where the kind of sculpture nerd in me comes out, where it's, and who knows, I'm sure people don't care, but I don't know, there's something about like really wanting to evacuate all the volume out, like suck all of the monumentality out of it, and then just seeing like, okay, let's see the tension of how much we can make this stand.
And I guess there's also something interesting about like making it, like I'm deciding to make this barrier, I'm deciding to make this shelter, I'm making this protection, you know, I'm kind of controlling this. So there's something interesting about that as opposed to the chain link fence is put up to prevent people from entering. You know what I mean? So there's something about that decision. Yeah.
I mean, some of it is like, yeah, just kind of cultivating that fragility, I think, in the same way that the rope actually, because we're twisting it ourselves, it actually becomes this, it contains that movement of twisting, but also it's just really, really strong. It's something that I couldn't find anywhere else. And so it has that history of the body, which I'm interested in. I had a question for you. It was in relationship to that. Anyway, it will come back to me.
I'm wondering, is there work that from your past that if you could insert a work into the show now, considering the pandemic, the uprising, last night's convention speeches. Like, what, is there a work that you wish could be seen now that could be like, this is like the moment? Is there a work? Because I think there's so many works that seem to fit this moment, but I'm wondering if there's something like, if I could do this over right now, is there a work you wish you could insert into the show?
What's the work that are you thinking of a work that you have?
What of that question?
I mean, I'm working on this piece now that feels really appropriate, but it also involves bodies. It involves people, and it involves being within a space of this planetarium and thinking. I've been working on this 3D animation of this tornado, but it's thinking about different kinds of metaphorical storms. I don't know, I've just been thinking a lot about natural disaster and the way that we're so connected with our phones and our relationships to our bodies right now. And one of the images that I'm trying to create is a stadium crowd, and they're roaring in a kind of fanaticism, and they're all holding up their cell phones because they're trying to, they're giving homage to the music act, but they're also, it becomes this kind of chanting roar. And I don't know, I've really been interested, I've really been trying to create a piece about our relationship to media, and create all these invisible forms of violence that are kind of spinning in the air. And I feel that way with the pandemic right now. It's like, I think even Kamala Harris talked about it last night, how the virus is invisible and that there isn't a vaccine for racism or something like that. But it was just like, it feels that there are all these invisible structures, and so, I'm trying to create all these smoke clouds. It comes from, that the smoke cloud mirror piece that I've been doing, that's in relationship to that, which is, it'd be a good segue to talk just about mirroring, really, because you did a mirroring with your monument in Germantown.
Yeah, like I was thinking about invisibility. There's a theorist, I'm forgetting his name, but he talks about, I was thinking about invisibility, but I was thinking how he speaks about, he kept talking about silencing. I was thinking silencing is kind of the equivalent, or selective silencing. And I think also about, when I think about invisibility, I'm often thinking too about blind spots. It's this thing you don't see, but if you're there, if you were willing to look right before or after, you can see it. So I think about, like, what does it mean to occupy the blind spot? So, so this piece, really, it's one of those pieces where it was kind of amazing how it so quickly came to, like, this is what I had to do for it. But to me, it worked. I mean, I'm not going to go into the whole history of, like, the project, but because there's been a lot of written about it. But to me, I was definitely interested in, and in the idea of a history that most people didn't know, that the monument, dedicated to this German settler who was fighting for Black liberation, was boxed over during the war. Is like, to me, the fact that I didn't know that, was it? So I think about all those histories, and then I think about that history of, a German being kind of censored, during the war for bravery and fighting for Blacks. And I'm thinking, like, why is that history I don't know? So I thought, like, how can I kind of take that history and kind of reinsert it onto this George, Washington memorial dedicated to a failed battle. So I was thinking about that original history. Like, no one really talks about Francis Daniel Pistorius. His monument is in the corner of the park when I feel like it should be in the center, considering it's in Germantown, one of the founders of the community. But then so there's one history. Then I thought, well, the centered monument was, of course, the Battle of Germantown Memorial. So what would it mean to me literally to transcribe a history from one period onto another? And then it just became so obvious, monuments, in a way people don't see monuments, There's this great quote about it being like monuments are like monuments are the equivalent of like oil and water, how they kind of like water just runs off the oil. Like we don't see them. They're there for us to pay attention. We don't see them because of the materiality, because of they're kind of trying to represent a universal when it's a singular moment. The fact that it's they don't treat history as like multiplicitous and paradoxical and all those things. I thought, okay, if this became obvious, if I mirror it, the monument will never sit still. And if you say monuments aren't functioning, like we have to make monuments function for us. There has to be a new way to deploy them. So if we know being static, being kind of a long-lasting material doesn't work, what are other ways? So I thought mirroring it makes it that it's constantly shifting. It's never sitting still. There's a perpetual resolution in a way with the monument. And literally, if it's reflecting you, what does it mean for me to see myself in this? First of all, like, how can I, in a neighborhood like Germantown, which has a lot of poverty, to see yourself reflected through this object, which you might think that monument had nothing to do with you. You know, it wasn't reflecting your history. So all of a sudden you're seeing yourself reflected. So there's a humanity and a kind of a personal intimacy, but then what does it mean for you to be reflected on this huge scale in a way? And then all of a sudden it leads to then the responsibility. If I become the monument, like what's my responsibility? Like I go back to Obama last night, we're the keepers and protectors of the democracy. So I was like the protector of it physically, literally by covering it, but also if I'm seeing myself in this, what is my, democracy can be taken away,
Mm.
So, and of course, then when I made this piece, I wasn't thinking of all those things, even though the white supremacist rally in Charlottesville happened, a week after it was installed. So of course,
Oh, wow.
yeah, it was kind of all of a sudden this piece became like a call to arms, But I think about it now, like, when I talk about being the keeper and protector of democracy, I was thinking of that somewhat in the abstract, not totally, but right now it's like, hell, yeah.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, that's why I think this image has come back up. This piece, has been shown because it speaks about the protest. It speaks about like them taking down certain monuments, like what needs to be taken down. It speaks about like, we need to be seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, on Monument Avenue in Richmond, it was really, those monuments were put up to show who was in power and who wasn't. And so it's a great reversal of thinking about monuments, which is what I think is so exciting about this piece.
Yeah.
And also the way that it engages, it implicates the viewer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking the same way about the mirror in relationship to the smoke clouds, how it does reflect.
That's a fragmentation of a building, right? The bricks. Is that brick? Is it?
Yeah, so it's basically, it just reflects whatever it encounters. So yeah, so it's basically
That's
just
the ceiling. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's capturing the ceiling. But when it really came from really being intrigued by these images of the Ferguson riots, and even with
this would be the piece to be in the show now if the show was open.
This would be the piece. This would be the piece. Yeah, like it started with just kind of being a little obsessed about smoke clouds and explosions and this ephemeral moment after this moment of, this great violence, and wanting to somehow capture that. And so just kind of pouring silver nitrate. These are basically treated as these photographic tins, like where it's exposed to ultraviolet rays, and then tinned, and then I pour the silver nitrate in order to try and capture this storm, really. But it's I don't know, it's always an experiment. It's always some give and take. But the interest was really just how it was the shifting image that appeared and disappeared, and wasn't really an image at all. They're architectural pieces of glass, so they're quite high, at least 8 feet. But yeah, it does speak to that thing of that invisibility, but also claiming a kind of visibility in a way. Or having the content be brought forward for you. But
it's that thing of like, I was thinking about that with that monument. It's like, monuments are always about like that why aspect. So what does it mean now with the mirror? All of a sudden now it's like, it's reflecting what's behind you, above you, below you. So all of a sudden things are shifting. So what was in plain sight that you didn't notice, all of a sudden now when you see it, what does that change in terms of your thinking of? What does that consider about that space? What does it mean now that there are these exposed beams, you know, as opposed to, you know, all of a sudden really.
Right, yeah, activating that space.
Like, pay attention to. You know?
Right, exactly.
So good.
Yeah. Yeah. What piece would you?
I don't know. I'm trying to think now. I don't know.
Can you talk a little bit about the wall?
Right now with work, like I can't, like I've been doing a lot of writing, you know, about, you know, my, like that mural that's being, I'm having to deal with in Kentucky that's coming down, and I've been doing all this writing, but.
Oh, it's coming down? I thought it was going to be permanent.
Well, because the president is planning to take it down, it was like his gesture to help, you know, to his response to George Floyd was, instead of doing real work on the campus, he decided he was going to take down the mural, which then negates my piece. But I feel as though right now, I feel as though, what can I make? Like, I feel like this would be a great piece to be, I mean, but it's site specific, but it talks about the complications of this moment where we're reckoning with what monuments should never have been there, that have been so oppressive, repressive, and terrorizing, which need to, Columbus statues, we need those to go. I keep thinking about, are there pieces that exist from the early 20th century that we could still use as a tool? Like, what does it mean to make a work in conversation with the past and reimagine it? You know, I keep thinking about monuments shouldn't ever really be, I'm thinking, are there any monuments that should really be permanent? It should be this kind of temporary that you keep imagining. So for me, the idea that they want to take down the mural, to me, it's not about wanting something to last forever. It's more about like, let something be used and useful. How long can we use it? Or then maybe at some point we can understand why something else would be necessary, as opposed to like the quick act of like, George Floyd, this would be a way to shut people up. Is like, I'm taking down this controversial mural. You know, so for me, this piece was, again, it's one of those pieces where it was about just seeing what was there and kind of just using what was there. So you had this New Deal era mural. I'm sorry we don't have an image of it, that shows, you know, stereotypes of Black folks, stereotypes of Native American, that shows, oh, we do have parts of it. Slaves, you know, the industry was built on the backs of the slaves. You see, you know, these, you know, the Black musicians performing for the white elite. I mean, there are lots of problematics, like the lone Native American about to attack the white woman. So there's so many problematics, but I felt as though, how do we, what do we decide? This is at a university. What do we, is there a space for polemics? Is there a space for discourse? And we're in a tough moment in this country where there's no coming together. There's no space. I remember after the election, there was that program Undivided. Like every night at NPR, there was like this, where it was 2 days with Trump supporters and 2 days. And it was actually interesting. So I feel as though there's no space. And I was thinking, my positive when I wrote the Washington op-ed was that maybe this could be one of those works that could be used, because there actually was a thought, because it was in a university, that there could be programming, that could be, you know, conversations, that could be, this is the place where we could wrestle and kind of deal with really problematic, paradoxical, simultaneous, multiple histories that we have to kind of, that's part of our history, you know? So it was kind of unfortunate that the president is still thinking of tearing down this mural when my piece, and then the irony of purposely choosing a Black queer artist to make the piece, and now all of a sudden I'm being silenced in this act. So also I think about that, like when we talk about, you know, racism or like the do-good work of liberals, but how do you then the do-good work, then what does it mean? Like, it's like, how do you kind of suss out, like, how do you do the real work?
Yeah, no, what I loved about your, it was the Washington Post.
Yeah.
Washington Post op-ed piece, which I thought was great, which is that you were talking about what is true diversity, and it is having all these different kinds of opinions exist, which I think is, yeah, can be a problem in academia. It's like we can enter this bubble until we realize like, oh my God, our democracy is failing now, and that we're not having these difficult conversations. And so to just
Like my attempt
tear down a history is not actually true diversity. It makes sense in some situations, but yeah, in this, it's interesting.
Academia,
it's too bad.
We're in a tricky point. I mean, I was psyched that Tyler, our dean, we did a conversation with a couple Black alum and two current faculty moderators, myself and Rashid and Nate, an architecture faculty. And it was like 150 people on this Zoom, and they were talking about, you know, the problematics, the really tough stuff that happened, the racism they faced.
Right.
And there were faculty on that call who I knew were some of the the reasons for it. And it was exciting because I thought it was going to be a defensive of people, the faculty who haven't done the work. You know, I'm expected to know everything about minimalism and everything about classicism, but they don't have to just, you know, show art color. So it was a moment, but I was actually excited that it seemed as though that people were open. Like I sent an email to one of the faculty saying, maybe you should read this, because this would be a great text to show your architecture students. I show my public arts. But I'm thinking about like so many places are just, people are going into their silos. And I'm thinking, how do we find a way to use, like make it useful? There was enough in this mural that I thought where you recognize that the mural is, and how do we deal with intersectionality? At the time of her making this mural in 1934, it was like the largest mural fresco made by a woman. So how do we deal with that history at a feminist history with the, I think it's how do we reconcile, how do we hold two opposing things at the same time that are true?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not talking about Donald Trump's nonsense too. They're like things that are true. This was an important mural. There were two other murals at the university that were called, one was called Work, that didn't show any Black people. So like, so how do where's the space for this? And I think this is going to be the challenge with like monuments going forward, works in public realm. Like, what do they look like? Who are they for? How do they represent I'm not going to use the word diversity, but multiple perspectives? How do you do that without it being like, we're all going to agree, because that's not democracy either. Consensus is not democracy. Dissensus is democracy. So if we all agree, we're probably not being true. I think we're in a tricky place.
I mean, how did you feel once when the protests were happening? And because I feel like, and Hilton Ellis talks about this, that there was a certain kind of way that people were silent because it was, how did he say? He talked about how his mother said that you don't want the oppressed to take your power away from you by getting angry. Like, it's better to just be silent. Like, what was your, I mean, because what I hear you talking about is this kind of discourse, and which I think people have been afraid to have in a way. And I'm wondering, is that a part of it? Is it in response to this current climate?
Yeah, I think that's why I did the op-ed, because there were things that were practical and pragmatic that had to happen. But then I thought, okay, in a way, those are the easy ones. We know the Confederate miners had to go. We know the Christopher Columbus, etc. But nothing is so simple, right? So where are those other spaces? And it really came, I mean, I thought of the idea literally the day that HBO came out with they're pulling Gone with the Wind until they created the context for the right language. Like, yes, it's a racist film. This is a context. And I thought, oh, someone could have said erasure is it. Erasure is the answer. But of course, we go back to look at, I'm always amazed by, I mean, we took a lot longer with Black culture where, you know, Jewish tradition, they will not let us forget the Holocaust, as they shouldn't. We only recently have, you know, a memorial to the terror lynchings. You know, so what does it mean to, I remember when Beloved came out, that movie, Black folks were up in arms. They didn't want that film. Like, we don't want to see slavery. 12 years a slave. And I understand that because it goes back to the pornography of lack of pain. But how, but that's my question. Like, something needs to be, the past is always, is our understanding the present is contingent on the past. So we need some things to wrestle with, to understand, to dissect, to interrogate, to rub up, to go in, to invert. I mean, we have to have something to work with. So I felt as though with my pieces, like that was the thing to work, but it was only the start, was my response to the mural.
Right.
But again, y'all thought it was enough to just get a Black artist to make the piece and it's done, as opposed to like every semester we need to have programming. Now we need to make another work. We need to like expand on this, you know?
Right.
So it's a tricky, it's a tough moment, you know?
I mean, I think what's great about this moment is that actually people are receptive to it. I mean, it's like Sarah Ahmed in her, what is it, her book, A Feminist Life, talks about like, you have to assert the fact that these things exist because people will tell you that it doesn't exist. You know, like in this post-racial world where we're all good and I'm not racist. And so like there were moments recently where I was like, you know, that thing of like, is it just me? Like, is that interaction just like, am I just imagining this? And I think now there's this conversation that's happening and where people are recognizing, wow, this is real. This is actually something that has to be reckoned with, and just particularly like in every single structure. And,
I gotta say, it is, I have to be optimistic. I feel as if you're an artist, you're optimistic. Like you're living in the world of the propositions and what ifs. Like that's where we're making or creating or thinking about the world we hope for, that we want to live in, right? So we have to be kind of optimistic right now, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, and I think also just with work, it has this kind of, or at least that's how I try and approach it with my work. I mean, I feel that way in a weird way with your wall. And I want to talk to you a little bit more about it because I'm interested in how like just how you thought of it, but also how the clothing becomes the mortar. And
I mean, I literally started thinking of this piece maybe a year and a half after Trump was in office. And I'm interested in wall. I mean, I'm obsessed with walls and going to Rome and seeing, you know, the Aurelian walls, like this 13-mile long monument basically. And I was thinking about walls as borders, walls as protection, walls as barriers, walls as a shelter. The idea that the borders, I feel as though the invisible borders that actually feel more solid or real than the actual walls that are there. So I was thinking about all the ways you can imagine a wall. And then I thought, it just came to me, the idea, like, I saw the Wailing Wall a couple of years ago, and I kept thinking about those cracks and those prayers in there. And then that Brazilian artist, Ravine, I forgot her last name. I should know, she shows it, Tanya Bonner here. She did that piece where there were wishes that people can take from like the wall, and then that got inserted to the next. So I kept thinking about like these different references of walls and idea. And of course, I'm thinking all the time about the Berlin Wall and how that kind of separated, you know, families by ideologies for years. And then, you know, it seemed like, how did that happen so quickly that the wall could be taken down? So it feels permanent, it feels impenetrable. But at the end of the day, it's modular. So it's bricks, it has to be built up. And then I just thought clothing. So that's kind of, all those things were like swirling around. And then I just thought clothing. And then I kind of in the back of my head, I've always had a kind of a love-hate thing with Jessica Stockholder, and like we're always talking about three-dimensional paintings. And then I just thought if I made clothing, it had to be used clothing, because I wanted there to be some evidence of like dirt or wear was really important. And then at the ICA, having 4 different people help me, it became this kind of beautiful composition and layerings of So I kind of like this kind of first thing you see this wall. It's like kind of it's like almost like an offense. It's kind of like it's almost too much, and then you see kind of it's kind of beautiful, and then you get closer, and then you start to see the individual in it. You see like the smush baby pajamas. All of a sudden now this anonymous it kind of go back and forth. This anonymous to this the specific, the macro to the macro micro thing happening. So all of a sudden you have, and we all have a relationship to clothing. We think about clothing as being imbued with kind of our identity, how we present ourselves. So I kind of wanted that experience, but then to me, the more important piece of this is when you turn around to the back and you see this cascade, because all of a sudden it's more than you can bear. And the idea that it feels like it's, feels like it's moving. It feels like it's undulating. So all of a sudden this wall that's stable starts to feel a little less stable. And then all of a sudden it's so clear that, the clothing is a surrogate for the body. And all of a sudden now you don't need the bodies. All of a sudden you could think about people climbing a wall. You could think about all those things, but also the idea that, well, what does it mean with us together? It's kind of hokey, but if we kind of commit to this and to each other, we can take it on,
Right.
And the idea again about taking it down brick by brick,
Right.
I think all of a sudden now that makes me think about Sonia Clark's piece that I love that in the gallery, that kind of taking apart the Confederate flag, and over the course of the gallery run, it was only this much was taken down. So the idea of taking this brick wall down, could have metaphoric, possibilities.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a poignant sense of loss because of just the histories of all these things, but then, this collective sense of hope in this really interesting way. Which
People have questions?
I know, I was just asking about that. So right now I don't see any, but it seems like the conversation's flowing pretty well. So y'all can just keep on going until some surface.
Well, one last question I have for you, Karyn, and because it's something that I'm interested in, is this thing, your title, Everything Alive. What is it? Everything that's alive moves.
Yeah, I mean, I kept thinking of the word wake and move. I wanted some reference to moving, because everything here, it's like, the wall, you come up against the wall. I think about the carousel is kind of going in circles. It ends up being a witness for it. You're like, the carousel is a witness of this, the atrocity in a way of the wall and the car cover, So I was thinking, but then also it's about this stasis. I feel like we all kind of go through this thing where we're moving forward. We think about culture going cyclical, like we're repeating, but then you think about the stasis, we're not going anywhere, this holding pattern. But so I was talking to Anthony about all these things and I said I wanted the word move because I wanted a relationship to move, the move group, because their proximity, only a couple miles away from the museum. And he actually said there's a line they used to say, people would say, everything that's alive moves. And I like that it wasn't like in their like move, that's their like subtitle, but if you know, you know. And then I just thought about that moving. Is it like you're moving because you're being displaced? Is it moving because we're now like, we have to protest? Is it moving because we're like, I always think about Carnival and the parade. Is it we're moving because if we don't move, like the fear, what happens if we don't, we have to keep moving metaphorically, we have to, So I like that move was like rooted in a body and a physicality, because so much of this work is filled with absence, but it's so filled with bodies. And what we do is move. When we don't move, eventually it's because we're no longer here, we've moved on, we die. So I loved how it could work politically and really literally, and also it's tied to the move liberation group.
Yeah.
And I love your title tied with mine. It's just like, because then sometimes you're moving, but you got that barricade, but then you have that ballast, you have that thing to kind of ground you, So I love our titles together.
Yeah, the barricade also as a kind of wall, as a kind of border. Who said everything that's alive moves?
People who were part of the group. you know,
Ah,
just say it.
wow,
You know?
that's great.
Yeah.
You got to keep moving. You're alive, so keep moving.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's beautiful.
Where are we at? 7 o'clock.
Yeah, we're at
Oh.
7 o'clock.
So questions.
We still don't have any at this moment. Y'all don't have any other questions for each other?
I feel good.
I do have a question.
Wait. And also, like, every piece, also like the obelisk. I was thinking about that obelisk I was talking
Yes.
about, like the obelisk being made, and they having to go across the Nile River, and then across the Mediterranean. See, then that led me to like the Atlantic Ocean, and now the obelisks were brought to the New World, but then also the Middle Passage. So to me, like, the title just worked because everything was about some speed of movement, even the carnation. You know, people moving the gallery, but I don't know, someone takes the train back to New York and then moving there. Someone else is walking. So I like the idea of moving kind of being this literal thing, but also when you're moving, what's happening? Like, what are you imagining through the movement? What are you hoping for? What's at the other side of that door? You know, when you're moving, things are happening as well. So I just love that it was a possibility of having like kind of that hopeful, but also like just the basic humanness.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also just the recognition of just, I also just think about it as, you know, just being a human being, but also making things and the labor of that, of just, and this is what the obelisk is all about, just the labor of moving. Mm-hmm. And yeah, and also somehow that moving also allows for a certain kind of agency, because yeah, you bring it forward or you manipulate it. And yeah,
then talk about your, because everything of all your works, like, we're aware that you actually physically had to move part of that fragment of that house, that building. There was so much about moving it there, and then it's this deliberate act of not, freezing, isn't it? But this capturing for this moment that we know, the suspension, but we know eventually it won't be there. There's something about the moving and then it's arrested.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, the idea of the house was that it would be a fragment, kind of in the same way that the rubble's collected from the streets of Philadelphia, just from broken streets, that I wanted the house to be this giant piece of rubble that held this whole.
Mm-hmm. Uh-oh, frozen? Come back.
It's frozen.
Come back.
You should unfreeze.
Unfreeze.
The whole thing can just collapse. But yeah, and so what you can't see from those images is that so much of the piece is understanding the piece, like you were talking about, Karen, by the movement of the body of the viewer in space, to understand like the kind of just the imminent collapse that could happen by that kind of threat as you're standing underneath it. And so yeah, all those, and even just, yeah, the way that there's this one piece from it came from the idea of this House of Cards project, where I was really just trying to activate the space, the interstitial space between all of the scaffolding. And that's really what it was about, like how to activate this kind of, just really thinking about that energy of protest and collapse and dismantling, like really trying to dismantle these systems as they're falling down, but supporting them with these ropes that aren't supposed to support them, because they're flat, they're limp, but they're not.
Right.
But but yeah, and the same thing with the halyard rope, that it's like, oh, there's actually, that was more about artifice in a sense, the artifice of power. But yeah, trying to see how the movement kind of suddenly makes that whole thing suddenly become clear in terms of what it is.
Yeah. So good, so good.
So Michelle, you really didn't talk too much about Blue Angels when we talk about, you know, commemoration or memorializing. I know it's in reference to September 11th, and there's a number of pieces I think in your exhibition that speaks to nationalism, I think in particular, and this idea of sort of castration of you know, the patriarchal systems that are in place, you know, or also impotence as well, like that these things aren't as potent as powerful as they used to be. So I think about the flag and how it's in a limp position. So I mean, are those things that you can elaborate on a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like what Karen was saying, it was really responding to just this kind of growing disease, you know, with the beginning of 9/11 of, yeah, it just felt like that a lot of that 9/11 was such a huge, quite literally this destructive moment for me when I was down in Soho and installing a show, and it just felt like all the work in the show was just like, why am I making this work? This is totally irrelevant, because it felt like this kind of, it was almost the beginning of what we see now, which is this kind of, this Western civilization kind of cracking. And so, so yeah, this was just this moment of trying to capture some hybrid images of this, like a fallen, like it was a combination between an airplane wing, and I was looking at a lot of birds and looking at the morphology of wings in order to try and capture this crashed thing. And so, but it was also thinking of in relationship to minimalism and the way that we make forms, or at least the way that I was making forms at that moment, was so much about the monolith. And so, or this, what I liked that term that you used, Karen, conventional exteriority. You use that in some of your writing, which I love. It's like conventional exteriority. And I think a part of it was trying to get into an interior kind of frailty that I felt like, for me, 9/11 broke something. And so I wanted to get to that by using this industrial minimalist material and treating it kind of like a piece of drawing that involved me just kind of treating it like a drawing, but also wrestling it with my body, and then creating these crumpled forms. So these pieces.
It's so good. It's so successful. So good.
Oh, thanks, Karen. I mean, it was like the models for these were just really, I would look at crumpled paper and then try and like, I mean, the problem with these is that, you know, it's metal. So I could really.
More power to you, sister.
It's not so easy. But so to get that kind of fragility, you know, I have to throw them away because it's like, okay, that didn't work. So it is that kind of, there is a risk involved, and then they're powder coated beforehand. So I had to like kind of mentally get rid of this idea of preciousness of this kind of, you know, fascist object. It's almost like I had to destroy the father in a way by like just going in there and yeah, just letting myself fail in a way. So but these were really liberating for me because I kind of got away from this thinking of like, this is what I'm going to make, and we're going to make a mold of it, and to something like, okay, let's just see,
Right.
let's just feel the gesture of where this will take us. So, but yeah, just like trying to explore this idea of those isms, and it's like with the whole thing of minimalism and nationalism with the flags, of just kind of deflating them and breaking them and having them and emasculating them.
If someone told me once I made perverted minimalism. Okay.
Okay. All right.
I love this flag piece.
Oh, thanks. It looks really funny in scale in relationship to the throne. Anyway, it's much larger, but than the throne.
How tall is it again?
I don't know. It's like 10 feet. It's up there. And the throne was like the thing that was in relationship to that, but made like after the election, which was to kind of make this kind of Giacometti, like emaciated throne out of lead roll, like just lead sheets, and then have it be this kind of petal like that's kind of unraveling. The gold is unraveling. It's very, very Trump inspired. But yeah, there must be some questions, I think. Is there a question?
Yes, so let me read this to you. I'm wondering how your studio practices have had to be adjusted around COVID-19 shutdowns, and how you're sustaining momentum in the studio through all that's happening now politically and with the pandemic. Have these recent events clarified your studio practices or halted them at all?
Yeah, I was saying before, I focused on writing. I can't even think of a thing to make, and I feel as though my work is always tied to some sort of history and politics, and I feel as though it's too here. I can't even think. And thank goodness I'm working on a memorial to dedicate to a former slave in Philadelphia. So at least I have this project that the conceptual idea was already finished, and now I'm working on tweaking things that are a little bit conceptual, but for the most part, the idea is there. If I had to think of that idea now, I actually think I might be paralyzed. If anything, now I'm looking at what I'm doing for this memorial, I'm like, it's spot on. Like I knew it was a good, but like now in this post moment of reconsidering monuments, it's like, it's gonna work. Like it's gonna be great. Not this one. That's like,
yeah.
but it's in the same park. It's in the same park.
Right. That's why I put it in there.
Yeah. This piece is good. This piece is good too. I think I would have changed. I may not have had as many quotes. I had several quotes. So, okay, so it's a blackboard, it's a rec center, students use, like they use this for the after school program, the high school football team uses the field. So there was no money for this percent for art. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna just use the wall, make a blackboard so they can use it for the summer programs, the after school, the high school. And then no one thought about how Stenton Park it's next to Stenton House, which is the mansion owned by James Logan, best friend of William Penn, slave owner, all of that. So I thought I wanted to do something so people could kind of be aware that that mansion's yours too. Like that building, fancy building that has that fence surrounding it, like that's yours. So I have some quotes of James Logan. There were some really good ones, like I don't remember now, going blank. There's some really good ones. I had like 3 of his, and then I had some quotes from Lucretia Mott, and some quotes from Anthony Benezet, who was he started like the first school for Black girls. He was like a super abolitionist. He started the first colored school. I mean, he did all this great work. So, and Richard Allen. So I thought, like, what would it mean to have these quotes, these quotes from history that are kind of like permanent, but then you have this blackboard with words that can be penned, all of a sudden then the idea that it's a blackboard, so it'll be this palimpsest. You might see some of it left over, but what would be the relationship between these quotes that And a lot of them I feel like they could have been written yesterday. I mean, they're so prescient. And then one day I went to do this interview and someone wrote, never, don't, when things go wrong, don't go wrong with them or something. It was just kind of like this perfect, like, so it actually, of course I knew there'd be like penises drawings up there, but there were also like really like amazing things people wrote and it actually was being used. The idea of like these histories and what was written, once you finish that, that's past history, right? Now that's history as well, a more recent history. So I was interested in that. Why did I get on that tear?
COVID.
Oh, yeah, work, COVID. So I started that. I have a piece that is where I just met with the Parks Commission a couple days ago, that I feel really happy that it actually, I'm not going to be embarrassed. It's like along the lines of standing up to what I think my work has to be in terms of my responsibility. But I am worried going forward, like how do I make work? How do I, like, I feel like now it has to matter even more. So I'm afraid of I might get paralyzed, or like wanting to take it all on. And that's like the biggest problem. Like you tell students, you can't take it on. Like it doesn't have to be all in one piece. And I feel like I'm going to have to keep telling myself there's so many spokes of the wheel of what's happening for everyone personally. That's a result of culture, politics, and all of that. But how do I kind of give myself space to, I don't know. I don't have not a one idea. I'll tell you that, not a one.
This is a perfect segue to the next question.
Wait,
Actually,
you have to answer. You're making a piece. You have your amazing stadium piece.
Oh, I mean, it's a good question because I can't help it. I mean, it's a crazy time. And it's also, in a sense, the shutdowns have been a great pause for me because I'm like, goodbye sculpture, It's like, there's a part of me that's like, okay, no more store. I don't have to store all this stuff anymore. Or like the ICA show, I feel like it's actually feels more relevant to me now, but I don't even know if I could make it again. And we couldn't have made it in this current environment. So I am thinking a lot. I mean, that the stadium project is changing. It's I don't know, I guess all you can do as an artist is just keep responding to what's out there and to trust that. And so, yeah, the Joplin project is changing from where it began, and then for me it becomes more relevant. But I'm definitely pausing, and like you, Karen, I'm just like, what does this mean? And one of the I think so much of work now has to, like, it's that thing. I was talking to someone the other day where I was just like, it's so weird when you look at movies that were even made last year and you see like crowds in rooms and you're like, no, don't, that's not safe. Like, don't do that. And so it's I feel like I can't help but negotiate what this means for humanity that we're having this talk like this. And that, like, for me, just in terms of, we were talking about materiality earlier. What does it mean that I can't, or that people may not be able to touch or feel the material of what I'm making? And does it mean that my relationship to images and media changes as an artist? And I feel like it will. Like I'm thinking about a piece about shadows. Like I've been, I don't know, when I was traveling, I saw this, I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, that's such a good thing to think about, right? This experience of seeing, it was in a bathroom where I saw this woman, just like, I saw her reflection, but it was like on the floor, and I was just like, wow, I wanted to create this. I don't know, it just feels like, again, moving more towards this invisible virus thing of like, what does it mean to create an image now as a result? Like, what, like, again, that question of what's the threat, and the threat is something that we can't see, and that's, and in that sense, that Joplin project is about the threat of these, of warfare now is coming in through the internet, and it's not through, warfare is now coming through a virus, and yeah, so I'm definitely thinking about, but I have no idea what it means in terms of the form. So.
Okay, so this still kind of speaks to what you all were just talking about. It's specifically for Karen, but I think, you know, this also touches on some projects that Michelle is currently taking on. So does the experience that Karen had at the University of Kentucky and the discussions about monuments in these charged times change the way that you think about creating public art? Does it make you less interested in creating public art?
Oh, more interested. I mean, to me, it's so important. Yeah, I'm much more interested in work in the public realm in a way than in a gallery space. I mean, there is, I mean, a lot of galleries are doing a great job, and there is an openness, but there's something about the incidental viewer that I just love. Someone who's not expecting to have an art experience, and they come upon something that's maybe wasn't there yesterday and it's there today, and all of a sudden that interrupts their day, and they might have to consider it or not consider it, or they, by the 5th day they pass by because they're on their way to work and they actually decide this time to stop and see it. So now they can't unsee it, and somehow something about that experience, if it's good work, is going to again go to the what if or another way of imagining the world, you know. So for me, public art is, I just think for me it's like harder because I want it to matter. Like I'm interested very much in beauty and seduction, and you know, I think that wall is beautiful, but if it doesn't have the kind of the weight of something, either emotionally or politically, it's not enough for me. Even though there's so much work that I love that doesn't necessarily have that, you know. But for me, so I think, yeah, public to me, I think it's important work, you know. And if it's hard, it's hard. I mean, I had a meeting, you know, 2 meetings the past 2 weeks about this project, and you know that people are questioning certain things, and I don't mind. I'm like, okay, I'm going to consider that. I think that's all good. I think that's a good thing to be questioned by, be it the constituents, the community, or whoever. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually in the gallery notes that Anthony Alms wrote about Karen's show, but it's, I'm going to quote you, Karen, how you say, I heard someone say that a monument reads like the end of a sentence, but no, a monument should be the beginning where you start to ask questions. And I love that, because it is this, yeah, that thing you were talking about, like maintaining the discourse,
and the fact that, like, history, like, I'm working on this diner project, and we cited my memorial at this certain area. Now they just found out recently some information, and actually they think Dinah is actually buried near it. So I think about how anytime new information gets unearthed, there's a possibility for us to create something to speak, because now this new information is shedding light on something that could speak about something that's happening this moment, or it could be perceived in the future. So to me, it's like, yeah, history will keep revealing, which makes us having to respond, which then speaks about, it has implications for the future. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been interested in public art, just in relationship to this moment, and monuments in relationship to protest. And you know, I saw I went down to the Richmond, the Monument Avenue, and it's like, it's just so electric right now, because there's a dialogue, there's a discourse happening there right now.
When did you go?
I was just on my way down to the Outer Banks to meet my family, but it was just a few weeks ago, but it was just like, you know, you're so, you know, it's like, it's Monument Avenue, and it has this very colonial history, and you know, and then you see this graffiti, and it's really beautiful in the sense that it's like, it's not supposed to be there.
The image
They're not supposed to be
breathtaking.
there.
Yeah.
Like the graffiti is not supposed to be there. And so, yeah, when do public monuments become?
Those people aren't supposed to be there. You're supposed to be just keep on moving.
Right, right.
It's scary. Keep on moving. So it's
Right. Yeah, so it's a moment, and I think it will change, which is what's so great about the Blackboard, is that it becomes the space. Yeah, what does it, yeah, how will that shift? You know, and it's always this question for me, because it's like, oh, I can't do this kind of, public art is always associated with this kind of plop art thing that was so problematic, say with like, you know, say Richard Serra's Tilted Arc. And so I think it has more of an urgency now of like, what could we do to just, that thing that we were talking about in terms of reparation and materiality and beauty, and involving the public in a way that has a kind of humanity, or recontextualizes certain iconography, which is what, you know, Karyn, you do so beautifully with that piece in Germantown.
That was a good one. We don't always hit it out of the park. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't.
Yeah, and then it's the context, right? And then,
Totally.
Yeah.
So we have two more questions left. This next one is specifically to Karyn, but you're both educators, so I think you both will have a response to this. It's in reference to your piece in the Washington Post, Karyn. Let's see. I'm wondering about how you might imagine students and teachers drawing out those polemics, since it can be hard for that clear didactic to work in art. If you could talk more about teaching specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to talk about, I don't usually like to talk about my work to my students, but I think I'm going to have to talk about monuments, and it's going to have to come up. But I feel as though I want to, you know, when I was trying to talk, I keep thinking about, like, I had a reporter ask me, like, well, don't you feel bad for the Black students who are triggered by it, by seeing that mural? And I said, of course I do. But I think, you know, go to Alice Walker, healing begins at the site of the wound. And yes, you could take any quote you want from anywhere and take it to use it. But I go back to the protests, which to me were sites of healing. And healing does not mean that we're just holding hands and it's a kumbaya moment. That's part of it. Some of it is like we're dancing, and some of it is like rage. So I think I'm going to try to approach it in terms of, like, there's some monuments I'm not even that aren't in question, but I do want us to talk about usefulness and what does it mean for a monument's power is really, the power of a monument is in the gathering, it's in the people. You know, we're the ones who imbue it. So I think I'm going to have to deal with, when we talk about like things that are triggering, but it's actually maybe not that difficult, because some monuments are just so clear that shouldn't be in the public realm, shouldn't be in the public square. But for other ones that could be a little like the Ballast Germantown Memorial, some people would say that monument should come down, he was a slave owner. But to me, what I did was spotlighting something that no one, the tragedy that no one spoke about, that, for instance, Daniel Pistorius' monument was boxed over. Like if I didn't do that, if I didn't have that, I couldn't talk about that. So I'm thinking, like, how do you have space to deal with pain? Like, I think we're in a tricky time right now where, like, we have to be okay with pain. You know, it even goes to to playgrounds. They all have that cushiony stuff. And I'm not saying I want every kid to break their arm when they jump off the monkey bar, but there is something that's shifted, that there's no recognition that you can get hurt on a playground really much anymore. And I'm not saying it's good, but I just feel as though, where is the space to deal with that with my pain, but I'm also resilient, you know? There has to be a space where you witness it to then you know, tear it down. I just feel like if it's not, like, there has to be polemic, polemics. I feel like people are avoiding it. And we're sophisticated beings who handle complexity in our lives every day, you know? And I don't know if it helps to not have some of it presented to you and have to wrestle with it. I don't think I answered your question. Who is it? Is there a name of a person?
I thought it was great. It's just, I thought that
Hey,
was great.
Kim, I just emailed you. Is it Kim? Hey, can't talk. Let's talk. Makes great art. Kim Beck makes great public art, and I'm going to talk to her students. Let's talk about this, because maybe we could have a plan to co-teach a class on Zoom to our class about this. Could be fun.
Let's go to the next question. And then
So the final question is, I'm interested to hear between the two artists, whether form follows concept or concept follows form. Do you begin with materials and find them manifesting themes or concepts, or do you primarily work from concept and then fit the forms to the idea, or is it both?
You want me to go?
Yeah.
For me, it's always about concept, and then I blindly start experimenting with materials and you know, thinking about, for me, it's so much about language. It's like if I'm thinking, say, about nationalism, then I'll be thinking about the flag and trying to deconstruct it. And with the Halyard pace, it became more about the hardware. I realized that I wasn't interested in the image, but more about the hardware of it and the mechanics of the way that it kind of asserted itself within an architecture. And so, yeah, I mean, I love just experimenting with material. And so there's just a lot of failure in relationship to that. But it's always about the concept. And kind of, I can't remember what Karen was saying, but you were saying, like, it's got to have this. It's got to have this kind of, I can't remember what you said in terms of it having a certain urgency. And,
it has to matter. Like,
yeah. So I feel like it's all, for me, it's always the concept is kind of the mantra for me. Like, is it really communicating that even in, not even just the form, but like the way that it's being handled, or like, I always think about it in terms of the body language of it, or like the way that, like, say, like, I'm thinking of Karen's, the way that, like, the clothing can droop down, and or just the histories of that. And so it's so many different layers of all of that. And like, for me, the form of the, like, if we're talking about the chain link fence, that's why it was so important. I was like, it has to look wilted, and how are we gonna get it to that? And so it was thinking about it through that.
I mean, I think for me, I mean, I didn't study art in college. I went to Dartmouth and I studied psychology, and then I started taking ceramics classes. And it definitely was form first. And then when I got to grad school, I remember struggling with this piece, and my professor said, stop using clay then, use a different material. And I said, what? He's like, you should think about the idea first. And I'm like, I'm in a ceramics department, what are you talking about? He's like, stop using clay for a month. And literally I never went back. So for me now, it's definitely like, that was kind of, you know, Tony Hepburn's like, stop using the clay, stop thinking about the form, you get an idea going. So that's just the natural way of thinking. And I think now, I mean, that's just the way art is, no matter if it's in the gallery or out in the world, it's always in context to something, someone, some event, some situation, So the context creates the content. You know, you have to, the idea has to be the thing in a way, you know, and then what's the correct material, things that could actually draw that stuff out. Yeah. Art's hard. It's hard to make art.
Yeah, yeah, so hard.
Well, thank you all. This was great.
Thank you
Thanks.
all.
Can you send me that?
Thanks
Appreciate
everyone
it.
for
Can
coming.
you send me that Hilton Olive article?
Yes, it's so good.
Please.
Because basically, he's basically said, he's writing a letter to, kind of, it's this letter to his mom where who's deceased. He's like, I'm like, this silence is killing me now. And he lists all the moments of like when he was silent. And so, yeah, it's a great article. I highly recommend. It was from June, but I'll send it to you for sure.
Okay, well, have a good night, everyone. Great chatting
Yes.
up. Thank
Thank
Have
you,
a good night,
everyone.
too.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, James.
Now we have to one day have
Thank
a
you
cake
all.
or something.
Yeah, we will. We will.
Take care.
Okay.
All right.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Thank you.